There are more than 100 unique styles of beer, each with their own set of ingredients, process, guidelines, history, and experience. If you're a beer lover, an industry leader, or somewhere in between, a better knowledge of beer style will improve your life and your work.
Welcome to A Sense of Beer Style, essential beer style training for those who want to lead in food and beverage. I'm Julia Herz.
And I'm Jeremy Storton.
We're advanced Cicerones, beer judges, home brewers, and we're excited to guide you through the vast and wonderful world of beer styles.
All right, welcome to one of the more significant biggies based on the interest, sales, and demand for this category of styles. We're going to cover 2 of 4 under standard American beer. Stay tuned and find the dedicated prep episodes on cream ale and American wheat. But in this instance, Jeremy, you and I are going to talk about American lager and American light lager as the predominant style enjoyed in the U.S. Definitely.
Yeah, even the world. We could extend it to the world. It's a big seller. It's a dominant beer around the world. So in whatever form it shows up in, but it's definitely a good one.
Yep, I agree. And the relevance of this is that it's not just American lager, but that evolved then to American light lager in the 70s. Miller Brewing Company was definitely behind helping, acquire the formula for light beer and really brought it to the masses. I remember lots of TV advertising campaigns, very misogynistic based, I will say, based on sports figures and getting the style out there. And it was all centric on calories and thinking about, great taste, less filling kind of stuff.
Yes. Tastes great, less filling.
Yeah. So talk to us about typical ingredients.
So typical ingredients, it kind of goes to show, and I won't get into a history lesson here, but when brewers came from Europe to try to brew the same beers that they had, they were working with new ingredients that just didn't respond the way that they did. So they had to pivot. They had to do the best they could with what they had. So that meant using 6-row barley, which had a lot more enzymes and more protein, but you also had to start using adjuncts like corn and rice. And so a lot of the evolution of all these beer styles is now you can use 2 or 6-row barley for these sort of things for commercial and even home brewers, but you can use up to 40% corn or rice as an adjunct for this, just to add to the sugar profile without using too much 6-row and getting all that haze. And we'll talk about this later. You want this to be a clear beer. But with the American light lagers, you can also use additional enzymes to help bring that to really work on those sugars that are left over. This is meant to be just a really light beer. And so that's typically what it is 2 or 6-row. Corn and rice is common, and just a very minimal use of hops. We'll talk about this in a minute. Hops are not a predominant story here. But it's virtually the same with the American light lager. It's just there's no mention of using enzymes to really reduce that sugar load. But I mean, we are trying to talk about a light lager. I call it the diet beer, and that's what those enzymes are really for. The additional enzymes, anyway. Talk about. I kind of led into this, Julia, but tell us about the overall sensory profile that we expect with this ingredient load.
Yeah, so when you are describing, whether it's tableside or to yourself as you're sipping it, poolside, lawn side, or at the stadium watching any kind of game, the sensory aspects of American light lager and American lager are a very refreshing, almost more so neutral style beer, not influenced by ale yeast esters. This is a lager. This beer has essence of graham cracker, bread flour notes that's very, very light and quenching and refreshing. It is very close to water, as many describe, and bad jokes about this beer style. You're not looking for a lot of hop flavor and bitterness, just barely discerning bitterness to actually balance the malt residual sugar and act as a preservative. And it's not a yeast-driven style in the flavor either. This style is all about quenching, refreshment, and the malt characteristics carrying the day.
And getting into talking about the appearance, I mean, the first thing we're going to do is look at this beer, right? And so in my glass, for those of you who are watching this on video, you can see that this is a very light beer. There's not much foam column there. Part of it is the glass, part of it is the beer. But you can expect with an American light lager and an American lager, they're all going to be very, very light straw to a yellow color. They should not be very dark. Excuse me. And as far as the clarity goes, these should be brilliantly clear. You should be able to look through these things and see a long way off. The head is going to be a very, very white, can be kind of a creamy foam if it's poured well, but it's not going to persist very long. A lot of beers have a really great column of foam on the top of it. This is not one of those beers. So this is meant to just be consumed in quantities. So there's not a lot of frills there, but it is, as you said, meant to be close to water. Strong flavors are a fault. That's my favorite line from the BJCP when it comes to talking about this stuff. But that's what you can expect just from looking at the glass. But from there, we get into the aroma. Julia, talk to us about the aroma. What does it smell like?
Yep, and I'll talk about aroma that really is going to also predominantly carry over to the flavor of this beer as well. So low malt aroma, the style guidelines say is optional in the aroma, but I predominantly would get ethanol, low ABV, alcohol, and malt. That 6-row barley malt type of notes. Some grainy, sweet, or corn-like essence is allowable and certainly is often present. Floral, spicy hop notes not usually present, but could be found at a very fresh craft example of this. And that back to that clean fermentation profiles, you don't want to find a lot of sulfur notes in this. Some of these beers have acetaldehyde or that fresh green apples, or green apples and fresh cut pumpkin. You're hoping to not find that, but they can find and volatilize out and dissipate. But really more all about that neutral essence, and you're smelling in the glass a little bit of everything, but not anything being too dominant. And that takes us to the taste.
Well, and of course, aroma and taste go hand in hand. And there are some of these examples where I almost get just like a subtle, very subtle, like a sweet banana hint. And some of the craft versions that are maybe they're using just all 2-row or whatever the particular house yeast. There's certain ones that I get like a matchstick sulfur note out of it, sulfur dioxide. And if it's at a really low level, that's totally fine. But these mass-produced beers, they're going to be as clean can get, because I mean that's what they do. But when we get into flavor, we're talking about this is for me, this is really a malt-driven beer, so that you can get a very low to low, kind of grainy corn flavor. A lot of these, they take me back to my childhood, which sounds funny to say because we're talking about beer, but it reminds me of Corn Check cereal a lot of the times, and that's just a strong flavor memory I have, and I get that all the time. And with the hops, there should be low to no hop aroma or flavor really in there. Again, you can tell that the hops are there because it hasn't, the sweetness hasn't gone cloying and kind of gone on a runaway train. So now the hops are there keeping it in check. And as far as the yeast-derived flavors, you can get a little bit of that light fruitiness, like I talked about. There, a tiny little subtle notion of banana can happen, and that's okay. A little bit of DMS or acetaldehyde, they're not common, but if you get just a touch of that sort of stuff, it's okay. But it's when they kind of dominate the flavor profile. These are lagers. These are mass-produced lagers, so they should not have any strong flavors.
And then I'll spell out DMS stands for dimethyl sulfide,
yes.
And often will showcase itself as cooked corn.
Mm-hmm.
And that is all good, very well described. And that brings us to mouthfeel, where we're actually finally going to remind you, we're talking about two styles, American light lager and American lager. And there actually is a difference between the two. Whereas for flavor, appearance, and aroma, the two are extremely similar. But on mouthfeel, if you're talking about that American light lager, it can get to a watery body, very, very light. Both of them very highly carbonated. The style guidelines talk about something I'm very sensitive to, carbonic bite, which is carbonic acid from CO2. carbon dioxide, and it can bring a little bit of acid note to it. But so whereas it's very light, sometimes watery for the American light lager, you're going to have low to medium body on the American lager, and then the rest of it would certainly be the same. What about style comparisons?
Style comparisons. These they're primarily they compare to each other, and if you look at the stats that we'll talk about in a minute, the American Light and American Lager really kind of are a step up from each other. I mean, they're basically the same beer, but even the ABV can overlap, and you can have basically the same beer. The American Lager is, you can really define it, and especially side by side, it's going to have a little bit more body. Another good comparison would be to a German light beer, the German light beer. But the German light beer will have a little bit more hop character, a little bit more bitterness than these. These are meant to just wash down really nice and clean. If we were to extend even further, a Munich Helles is going to have a lot of body, a lot of flavor, a lot of malt-driven kind of flavor compared to this stuff. This is going to taste like water next to something bigger like that. But that's really the best way to compare these two things is really to each other. Another one, just a note, like a German Pilsner, for example, it's going to be very, very light, but you will get more malt flavor and a heck of a lot more hop character in those beers. Other than that, let's talk a little bit about some commercial examples. What are some beers that we can expect to see from both light and American, since they are close?
Sure, and so many of the names on this list, no matter what your age is, you've been exposed to the branding and marketing of these, sometimes up to 8 or 12 times a day. And on the light, American lager side, Bud Light, Coors Light, craft version of Grain Belt by August Schell, which is an amazing version to get your hands on. Michelob Light, Miller Light, just think standing in a bowling alley ordering a beer off of their 8 tap list, and 6 of them are going to be these. And then American lager wise, you just take the word light out and you go with Budweiser, not just light. Coors Original, Grain Belt Premium is certainly on the list. American lager, Miller High Life, Old Style, etc.
Miller High Life.
Yeah, and that's what Jeremy's got going now.
Yeah.
So let's kind of round it out and come close to home on all this, which is the beer stats.
Yes. So first thing we need to talk about is ABV. And for anyone who's studying this stuff to memorize, particularly for advanced Cicerone or above or a beer judge, whatever it may be, one helpful thing that worked for me is that these basically just step up from each other. For the ABV, the American Light goes from 2.8 to 4.2. And this is where there's a little bit of overlap because the bottom end of American Lager is 4.2. So technically they could be the same beer. But so we're going to go from 2.8 to 4.2 for American Light and 4.2 to 5.3 for the American Lager. Basically, American Light's going to stay within session beer land, and the American Lager is going to be within that average range of most beers that you see out there in the world for ABV. And Julia, do you want to talk about IBUs?
Sure. IBUs, International Bittering Units, 8 to 12 for American Light Lager, 8 to 18, a little higher for American Lager. 8 really is barely discernible or detectable levels. And then you go above that and you do have some bitterness that most palates will detect. It's also a misnomer because you've got, to me, what I follow certainly from Ray Daniels and Cicerone training is the BU to GU ratio, which is bitterness units to gravity units. And the more residual sugar a beer has, the more it will balance out that bitterness. So you won't detect it as easily. We can have a whole episode on that. So I will just bite my tongue from here. And then start talking to you about the SRM and the final gravity.
Yeah, the SRM, or the Standard Reference Method, is what we use in the U.S., of course, and in Europe it's the European Brewery Convention, or EBC, which is roughly twice of the SRM. For these beers, they're both virtually the same, 2.3. I mean, we're talking pale to maybe like a pale yellow at the most. This is on the extreme light end of the spectrum, and it's one or two stops away from being clear and colorless. So understand that the SRM is just very, very, very pale to maybe yellow on a good day.
And what I'm going to jump into, because BJCP uses this, and pale tells me nothing really. And so I would say, and you did throw a color descriptor in there, but straw. Think of straw
yeah.
or hay.
Yeah.
And then and that's 2 to 3, and then 3 to 4 is yellow. And then above that, which these beer styles are not rated SRM wise, 5 to 6 is often gold. So that will help you understand what pale really means.
That's great. And even for those people who don't know or haven't been exposed to straw, I mean, you could go to any paint store and see the difference between white as it starts to fade into beige, as it starts to fade into like just a hint of yellow. I mean, we could go down this rabbit hole further. I'm going to stop there, but I think you get the idea that we're talking about pale, we're talking about very light, we're talking straw, we're talking barely beige to barely yellow. But let's talk about original gravity and final gravity.
Yeah, and I mean, I really would focus more so on final gravity and studying your guidelines. Sure, you're asked to like basically recite Bible passages if you're sitting for master level, and it is tough. So final gravity might make it a little easier. And you're looking at American Light Lager as being one of the lowest in residual sugar on the books, at least, 998 to 1008. And we did talk about how something can go below a gravity unit of 1.000 in another prepisode. But so for American Light Lager, 998 to 10008 is really showcasing a pretty dry finish. That's what that would reflect. And there's some overlap with American Lager having final gravity at 10004 to 1010. And that is, it's showcasing some residual sugar and not bone dry for sure.
Yeah, and it just a quick reminder with the original gravity, I think a take home is if as long as there's no problems with fermentation, it gives you kind of a clue of what the alcohol content is going to be in the beer, at least a ballpark. But final gravity, Julie, you said it perfectly. It's far more important to understand that anything under 1.010 or 1010 for gravity is a Plato of 4 off the top of my head. Anyway, so basically, when you get under gravity of 1010, the body is just not going to be there. It's going to be light. It's going to be easy drinking, and you're going to be able to throw a few of these back. Is kind of where that lands.
Yeah. And then ideal glassware, big fight in the beer world to get respect for beer. I always say it's a win if we at least get it in the glass. But once it's in the glass, Jeremy's showing you a shaker pint glass, which really was created to shake cocktails bar side. Although bars on-premise establishments love them because they're easily stackable. They don't chip as much. And so it is usually a shaker pint that you would see. Serving temperature of 38 degrees Fahrenheit is what most draft systems in the U.S. are calibrated for.
Basically right out of the fridge.
And it is because of these two beer styles.
Yeah.
Exactly. Fridge temperature is also 38. Draft temperature is 38. And so commonly you're just serving it in a pint glass at that temperature. And as long as it's coming from clean draft lines, you're going to have a very refreshing beer.
Yeah, and I will say, I believe, this is my opinion, and I think a lot of people would agree with me, that beer should never be ice cold. But if there was a beer that you'd pull from the bottom of the ice chest, it would be these two.
Yeah.
For sure.
Well said.
Yeah.
And then we talk a lot about pairings. What do you have for ideas, Jeremy, on these two stuff?
I a couple weeks ago, I went and watched a preseason college baseball game, and I had a foot-long hot dog and a big Coors Light, and it was awesome. To me, that is the perfect pairing for a beer like this, or maybe even just like a summer barbecue. You just got done on a big old hike. That's kind of where these fall. There isn't a lot of impact to go with the stuff. It's more about the experience. It's more about cleansing the palate. But you are the queen of pairing. Where do you go with this?
Well, it is such a light backdrop of a beer style and body, mouthfeel, alcohol. So you want something that it's not going to get barreled over by, your lighter fare. You could get as crazy as doing this with, sauteed whitefish with a little bit of a butter sauce, but don't go too rich or the beer's just going to get washed away and you won't get any of those malt flavors. or yeast notes or hop notes. So go light or go alone, meaning just drink it on its own.
Yeah.
A lot of things that are salty though really are satisfying with this beer.
Yeah.
Chips out of the bag, popcorn in the in the stall, big bin. So I also use this example of a beer style to remind oneself that memories are very tied to our appreciation or bias, and our open-mindedness or closed-mindedness. And when I think about this style first, I have to talk myself out of overindulgence during college, which was never something, isn't something to be proud of. But this was and still is to this day one of those crushable beers that people crush too many of them. And you find yourself averse to this style because of that memory that you've been through. It's a really good exercise to put yourself in check on that and take the beer for what it is. Yesterday was yesterday, today is today. Beer in the glass today is not what you drank yesterday. Mm-hmm. So I would say enjoy it with anything that's not too heavy. Enjoy it on its own, and don't, tie mental baggage to the style when frankly it's the number one selling beer style in the U.S.
And honestly, kind of tag on to that is early on in my beer geekery, I wanted to dislike these beers. I wanted to find offense in these beers, but as I've gotten older and as I've had to go back and study these, I've realized, no, I really do enjoy these. These, for me, all beer is a tool for a certain job, and these beers definitely have a place within my beer lexicon and in my beer fridge. It's just a time and place.
Yep. And last closing note is these are harder to ferment for time, commitment of getting lager yeast to ferment, for cooler temperatures and the length of time it takes for them to condition. That's why the craft movement is so centric on, ale-centric beers and other styles. Although now that craft brewers are all grown up, you're seeing so much more lagers being brewed by craft brewers because they have the wherewithal and the resources to ferment something that takes longer in the tank. Lagers means lagering, to lay it down. And to lay it down means it needs time to condition. Whereas you could get, turn and burn a nice little American pale ale out in 2 to 3 weeks. Lagers are going to take 6 weeks or more when often done at the regular time schedule. So lagering means to lay down. And these are 2 great examples of them. And we'll talk about other lagers as we work our way through the styles with you.
Yeah. Just don't forget to go listen to the prepisodes if you haven't already. And we're looking forward to the next one.
Cheers to everybody listening.
Yeah, cheers.
Thank you for listening to A Sense of Beer Style, the essential beer style training for those who want to lead in food and beverage. With advanced Cicerones, me, Julia.
And me, Jeremy.
Tune into the next episode as we continue exploring the world of beer styles and what to make of them. We encourage you to listen to the prepisodes to build your foundation and better understand beer styles.
And before the next episode, I'd like to ask you to review the show and let us know what you'd like featured in upcoming episodes. Until next time, here's to you and your sense of beer style. Thank you for listening. Cheers.